While many skirmishes during the Red River War were small and resulted in few casualties, several key battles stood out. Among them were the battles of Red River, Sweetwater Creek, and Palo Duro Canyon, along with notable fights like Lyman's wagon train and Buffalo Wallow. The first major clash of the war erupted on August 30th, 1874, when Colonel Nelson A. Miles led troops from the 6th Cavalry and 5th Infantry in pursuit of a large band of Southern Cheyenne near the Prairie Dogtown Fork of the Red River, an area now spanning southern Armstrong and northern Briscoe counties, Texas. Military reports describe the Battle of Red River as an intense, day-long engagement across the rugged canyon lands flanking the river. Despite the Army's superior firepower, 650 soldiers equipped with 2 Gatling guns and a 10-pounder Parrott rifle, the Cheyenne warriors held their ground long enough for their families to escape up Tootle Canyon and disappear into the vastness of the Staked Plains. A week earlier, Major William R. Price led companies C, H, K, and L of the 8th U.S. Cavalry out of Fort Union, New Mexico, heading east toward the Texas Panhandle as the westernmost force in the campaign against the Southern Plains tribes. His column, consisting of 216 soldiers, included 2 mountain howitzers and a heavily loaded supply train. Following the old Fort Smith-Santa Fe road, they crossed the Texas Panhandle south of the Canadian River. On September 4th, Price split his command, ordering Captain Farnsworth to take Company H, all the wagons, and 1 howitzer toward Adobe Walls to set up a supply camp. Meanwhile, Price led Companies C, K, and L, along with the remaining howitzer as the main force. On September 12th, as they moved northeast between Sweetwater Creek and the dry fork of the Washita River, they ran into a large force of Kiowa and Comanche warriors under the leadership of Kiowa chief Lone Wolf. The battle that followed, known as Price's Engagement or the Battle of Sweetwater Creek, unfolded along a high ridge north of Sweetwater Creek in what is now Wheeler County, Texas. Unbeknownst to Major Price and his men, a large group of native families was behind the high ridge, trying to slip away undetected. The warriors likely engaged the soldiers to buy time, drawing them away and keeping them occupied long enough for the women and children to escape safely to the southwest. The skirmish turned into a running battle, stretching over 7 miles and lasting about 4 hours. Meanwhile, Colonel Nelson A. Miles had set up his headquarters along the Red River. With supplies running low, he ordered Captain Willis Lyman to lead a military escort back to Camp Supply in Indian Territory to restock provisions. Lyman's detachment included 36 infantrymen, 20 cavalry troopers, and 36 civilian teamsters, only 10 of whom were armed. Their journey would soon take a dangerous turn. On September 9th, as Captain Lyman's supply train made its way back to the Red River, it came under attack by Kiowa and Comanche warriors near the divide between the Canadian and Washita rivers. The warriors opened fire from a distance, but Lyman's cavalrymen skillfully maneuvered the convoy another 12 miles south, reaching a steep ravine just a mile north of the Washita River. As they neared the river, the attackers closed in, forcing Lyman to order the wagons into a defensive corral. While the train was circling up, about 70 warriors launched a fierce assault from the right and rear, nearly overrunning the infantry's skirmish line. The soldiers held their ground, pushing back the attack, but the fight came at a cost. Sergeant DeArmond was killed, and Lieutenant Granville Lewis suffered serious wounds. A teamster named Sanford was mortally wounded while rushing ammunition to the troops. With the initial charge repelled, the warriors fell back to the surrounding ridges and began a siege. Later, it was revealed that several prominent Kiowa leaders, including Lone Wolf, Satanta, and Big Tree, had taken part in the battle. As night fell, the gunfire died down, but it was clear to Captain Lyman that the warriors had no intention of leaving. Realizing the siege could drag on indefinitely, he ordered his men to dig rifle pits around the wagon corral for added protection. At first light, the attackers resumed their assault. With supplies running low and the situation growing desperate, Lyman made the bold decision to send Scout W.F. Schmalzl to Camp Supply for reinforcements. Slipping away under the cover of darkness on September 10th, Schmalzl was quickly pursued by the warriors, but managed to evade them, reaching Camp Supply 2 days later. By the morning of September 12th, the siege began to break as the warriors pulled back. Later that day, A cold rainstorm swept through the area, continuing into the next morning. Despite dwindling supplies, Lyman chose to stay put rather than risk moving out in the storm. The command had lost 22 mules, and several horses had been wounded in the fight. In the early hours of September 14th, relief finally arrived as Company K rode in from Camp Supply with medical aid and an ambulance. With the siege lifted, Lyman resumed the march, rejoining Colonel Miles later that morning. Recognizing the courage displayed in the battle, Miles recommended 13 troopers for the Medal of Honor, and Lyman himself was later promoted for his leadership under fire. At dawn on September 12, 1874, around 125 warriors who had been besieging Lyman's wagon train decided to head south across the Washita River to reunite with their families. As they crested a small rise near Gageby Creek, they unexpectedly crossed paths with a 6-man detachment from Colonel Miles' command. This small group, tasked with carrying dispatches and locating Lyman's train, included civilian scouts Billy Dixon and Amos Chapman, along with 4 soldiers from the 6th Cavalry. What followed became known as the Battle of Buffalo Wallow. The warriors quickly surrounded the outnumbered couriers, leaving them with almost no cover. Realizing they had no choice but to stand and fight, the men dismounted and braced for battle. Private Smith was handed the reins to keep the horses steady, but within moments of the first shots, he was hit in the chest. As he collapsed, the panicked horses bolted, leaving the men stranded and outnumbered. For nearly 4 hours, the warriors fired relentlessly, taunting their trapped opponents. One by one, all but Billy Dixon were wounded. Scanning the open terrain for any form of cover, Dixon spotted a shallow buffalo wallow, a natural depression in the prairie. Seizing the opportunity, he dashed toward it, and 3 of the others quickly followed. Once inside, they used knives to dig deeper, piling up the loose dirt to form a makeshift breastwork. 2 men, however, remained exposed. Private Smith, who had been the first shot and presumed dead, and Amos Chapman, who had suffered a severe leg wound. Determined to save him, Dixon made several daring attempts before finally reaching Chapman and hauling him back to safety. As their ammunition dwindled, the men realized they needed to retrieve Private Smith's revolver and ammo belt. Private Rath braved the open ground to search Smith's body and returned with the supplies, but also with unexpected news: Smith was still alive. Without hesitation, Dixon and Rath rushed back, carrying the wounded soldier into the wallow, but it was clear he wouldn't make it. Dixon later recalled in his memoirs, "We could see there was no chance for him. He was shot through the left lung, and when he breathed, the wind sobbed out of his back under the shoulder blade." Later that night, Private Smith passed away in his sleep. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds rolled in, and a heavy rainstorm swept across the plains. Though the downpour left the men in the Buffalo Wallow cold and miserable, it proved to be a blessing in disguise. As the storm intensified, the warriors abandoned the fight and melted into the night. At first light, Billy Dixon set out on foot, determined to find help for the wounded. After a short trek, he encountered a detachment of the 8th Cavalry under Major Price's command. Word quickly reached Colonel Miles, who wasted no time in organizing a rescue. All 6 men later received the Medal of Honor for their actions that day. However, Dixon and Chapman's awards were revoked years later since neither had been officially enlisted in the Army. It wasn't until 1989 that the Army Board for Correction of Military Records reinstated their medals, finally restoring the recognition they had earned. The decisive Battle of the Red River War unfolded at dawn on September 28, 1874. Believing they were safe in the remote depths of Palo Duro Canyon, at least 5 Indian villages had taken shelter there. But Colonel Ranald S. Mackenzie and his 4th Cavalry launched a surprise assault, storming into the canyon with overwhelming force. With their people scattered, tribal leaders Iron Shirt of the Cheyenne, Poor Buffalo of the Comanche, and Lone Wolf of the Kiowa were unable to mount a coordinated defense and had no choice but to retreat. The soldiers torched the villages, destroying winter food supplies, and seized 1,424 horses. To prevent the warriors from reclaiming them, the army drove the captured herd 20 miles from the battlefield and slaughtered over 1,000 of the horses. Left without supplies or transportation, many Plains Indians had little choice but to return to the reservations as winter approached. In the following months, the Army swept through the Texas Panhandle, tracking down the last holdouts and forcing them to surrender. The Indian Wars on the Southern Plains had come to an end. Before the Indian Wars of the mid-1870s, U.S. Army troops primarily carried the Spencer repeating carbine, along with single-shot rifles like the .50 caliber Springfield and the Sharps carbine. In 1873, the Army standardized its firearms, adopting the Springfield .45 caliber rifle for infantry and a shorter carbine version of the same caliber for cavalry. These became the primary weapons used during the Red River War. Like its .50 caliber predecessor, the Springfield .45 was a single-shot firearm, requiring a reload after each round fired. While its most effective range was under 400 yards, skilled marksmen could land hits at distances up to 600 yards. The bullet left the muzzle at approximately 1,200 feet per second and had a maximum range exceeding 1,000 yards. Archaeological findings from Red River War battle sites suggest that Native warriors primarily relied on repeating rifles, including the .50 caliber Spencer, which held 7 rounds before needing to be reloaded, and the Winchester or Henry rifles, both chambered in .44 caliber with a capacity of up to 16 rounds. These firearms likely made their way into Native hands after the Civil War, when surplus weapons flooded the frontier through traders and gun runners. At first glance, the repeating rifles used by Native warriors might seem to have given them an edge over the Army's single-shot weapons. In fact, many Union officers who had seen the firepower of the Spencer during the Civil War were hesitant to trade it for the new .45 caliber Springfield. So why did the Army make the switch? The decision came down to 2 key factors: cost and battlefield strategy. After the Civil War, military budgets were slashed, and Army leaders recognized that soldiers with repeating rifles tended to burn through ammunition quickly, often firing without a clear target. The belief was that a single-shot weapon would encourage more disciplined marksmanship, ensuring each shot counted. Beyond financial concerns, many officers came to see the Springfield as the superior weapon. Its .45 caliber cartridge offered greater accuracy and range than the Spencer. Given the nature of frontier warfare, where Native fighters often engaged at a distance and only closed in when they had the advantage, the Army needed a rifle that could strike effectively from afar. While repeaters like the Spencer, Winchester, and Henry had the advantage in rapid fire, the long-range precision of the Springfield ultimately proved more effective in the Indian Wars. The weapons used in the Red River War weren't limited to rifles and carbines. Native warriors also relied on bows and arrows, with metal arrowheads either crafted by hand or obtained through trade. While these traditional weapons were still in use, the long-range nature of most battles during the campaign made them less effective compared to firearms. By 1874, the U.S. Army had adopted the Colt Single-Action Army Revolver, a 6-shot handgun chambered in .45 caliber. However, its effective range dropped sharply beyond 60 yards, making it more useful in close combat. The Army also brought firepower beyond small arms. Colonel Nelson A. Miles had 2 Gatling guns, each capable of firing .50 caliber rounds at a rate of up to 300 rounds per minute. The Battle of Red River on August 30, 1874, marked the first time the Gatling gun was used in combat west of the Mississippi. Miles also deployed a 10-pounder Parrott rifle, a small but powerful cannon. This artillery piece fired explosive shells nearly 9 inches long, designed to shatter into deadly shrapnel on impact. With a maximum range of about 2,000 yards at a 5-degree elevation, the Parrott rifle gave the Army a significant advantage in long-range engagements. Another artillery weapon the Army deployed during the Red River War was the mountain howitzer. This short-barreled cannon was designed for close-range fire, using smaller powder charges to launch its projectiles. It could fire either spherical shells or cylindrical canister rounds, making it a versatile tool for battlefield support.